Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Johanna Chan. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Voting is underway in Hong Kong's first Legislative Council elections under a revamped electoral system. 2 more firsts, polling stations at the border and the 40-seat election committee constituency. And Hong Kong's Siobhan Hawhey strikes gold again, this time in the 100 meters freestyle. Hong Kong's first Legislative Council elections since a drastic overhaul have been underway for nearly 12 hours. Let's take a look at the latest turnout. As of 6:30 p.m., around 1.2 million people voted in the 10 geographical constituencies to elect 20 lawmakers, representing a turnout rate of 25%. That's a 14.5% drop compared to the last edition in 2016, although the polls opened an hour earlier that year. The functional constituencies, which will return 30 legislators, fared slightly better, with turnout at 26.2% for the 27 trade-based sectors, plus the newly reformed sector for the national lawmakers and advisors. It was a completely different story for the new election committee constituency. Over 96% of the exclusive group of 1,448 votes have come out to pick 40 lawmakers. 8 voting stations were allowed to extend their opening time tonight after operations were halted briefly. And in a first, hundreds of ICAC officers were deployed citywide to watch out for tampering activities. Wen Wang reports.
A special queue was introduced this year for the elderly, pregnant women, and the handicapped. But it was hardly needed. That's because voters were able to easily walk into most of the city's 620 polling stations. The only exceptions were 8 centers which suffered preparation delays. 4 of them were forced to open later than scheduled. They were the Changsha Wan Sports Center, Ho Tak Kindergarten in Wong Tai Sin, Castle Peak Catholic Primary School in Tuen Mun, and Tai Po's Jockey Club Primary School. Electoral Affairs Commission Chairman Barnabas Fung said none of the delays exceeded 10 minutes, but those locations will stay open beyond 10:30 tonight to make up for lost time. The Po Leung Cook Network Center for Elder Support in Sai Ying Pun ran into some computer problems and had to halt operations for 22 minutes. That polling station extended its opening hours to 10:52 p.m. Simon Pei, who heads the ICAC, said he hoped the election could go smoothly without any trouble. About 900 ICAC officers were dispatched to patrol polling stations today to ensure a fair, just, and clean election.
Everybody has his free will or her free will to vote, so should not be subject to any interference by another person.
This comes after the ICAC issued an arrest warrant for 5 people in exile, including former lawmaker Nathan Law, for calling on people to boycott today's polls or cast blank votes. Wen Wang, HKIBC.
Our reporter Isaac Lee is monitoring the situation at one of the polling stations in Kowloon West. Isaac, what can you tell us from there?
Hi, Johanna. I'm now at this polling station in Meifu Sanchun. I've been staying here for around 1 hour, and so far no voters had to wait outside the station. And most of them could finish the process within 2 to 3 minutes. A special queue for the elderly and the disabled was also set up, but so far no one had to use it. This polling station will run until 10:30 tonight, but some others elsewhere will be lengthened because they started late due to preparation issues. I'll continue to monitor the situation outside and give you more updates at 10. That's all I have for now. Back to you in the studio, Johanna.
Thank you, Isaac. Candidates have been out and about urging their supporters to cast ballots. They included former opposition lawmaker Frederick Fung and his opponents in Kowloon West.
I think the more voters coming out to vote, it will be more favourable to me. So it is the time for me and my colleagues to mobilize more people and stimulate them to coming out to vote. The main point is I think Hong Kong people doesn't like we, the legislature, only have one voice. We need other voice. That's the benefit of Hong Kong.
We are trying our best right now, as we know that this morning we heard a lot of people that they are going to vote and already vote. So, but we still don't know yet. So we hope that more people come out to vote in the afternoon.
Also running is Scott Leung of Kowloon West's New Dynamic. The pro-establishment candidate passed out flyers outside Mei Fu Station this afternoon. Around 14,000 Hong Kong residents living on the mainland have cast their ballots at the border as of this afternoon. Many were ferried to the border checkpoints by coaches arranged by residential estates or companies. Raymond Young reports.
For the first time in history, polling booths were set up at Hong Kong's land border checkpoints to facilitate voting by SAR residents living on the mainland. But the 22,000 people who signed up for the service still needed to make their way to Shenzhen, and some large-scale residential complexes came to their aid. This development in Guangzhou arranged coaches to ferry Hong Kong residents to the border checkpoints. Rides were free, and most were happy with the door-to-door service. Reports suggested that many corporations and state enterprises with Hong Kong employees made similar arrangements.
身為香港公民啦，我覺得有責任同為香港嘅未來選取一個賢能，然之後。
This man, who works for resort operator Mission Hills, said he came with about 50 colleagues to the Futian checkpoint. He felt it was important to exercise his civic duty and pick his desired candidates. Scores of volunteers in red vests were seen nearby to maintain order and answer queries. It was not known who sent them. To proceed into the building, voters must produce a green code proving they were COVID-free and had not traveled to high-risk areas in the past 14 days. Many said the process was smooth and took just minutes, after which they could return to the mainland without having to quarantine. Ray Yang, HKIBC.
Hong Kong's movers and shakers are voting for the first time in the exclusive election committee subsector. The voter turnout for this group was very high. Winna Wong reports.
The city's political heavyweights arrived one by one at the Convention and Exhibition Center in Wan Chai. They're part of an exclusive group of 1,448 people who will choose 40 from 51 candidates among them to sit in the Legislative Council. Among the voters were former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying, who's now a Vice Chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, Basic Law Committee Vice Chairwoman Maria Tam, and former Chief Secretary Henry Tang.
My goal is to aim to look for more than just patriots, because that is a given. I also look for people with the commitment, the devotion, and the ability to work together constructively for the betterment of the Hong Kong people. So this is my criteria. All 51 candidates are excellent candidates, and they are all professional, capable, committed in their own fields. So it was not an easy choice. I had to do a lot of homework last night.
Also spotted were billionaire businesswoman Pansy Ho and actress Lisa Wang. In the revamped electoral system, 40 of the 90 LegCo seats will be held by election committee members. That's increased the power of the influential group, which used to only have exclusive say on picking the city's chief executive. Winna Wong, HKIBC.
Senior government officials tried to lead by example by voting this morning. Chief Executive Carrie Lam said she was not worried about the turnout, while her right-hand man urged people to vote so that those whom he labeled traitors would fail in their bid to disrupt the polls. Chief Executive Carrie Lam arrived at Raimondi College in the mid-levels to vote in the Hong Kong Island West constituency.
She said it was a meaningful day as the city was holding its first major polls since the electoral reform, adding that she was not worried about the turnout.
Well, I don't have any particular expectation, and I would say that the government has not set any target for voter turnout rate, not for this election, not for previous elections, because there is a combination of factors that will affect the voter turnout rate in any election.
Chief Secretary John Lee, who turned up at the Yama T. Kai Fong Association School to cast his ballot in Kowloon West, urged people to vote to ensure a successful election.
Under the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong, those who are excluded are those who act against Hong Kong's interests, are those traitors who will not be acting for the overall good of Hong Kong. So these people who have been excluded under the principles of patriots administering Hong Kong will be trying their best to make today's election not a success.
Other officials who voted this morning include Finance Chief Paul Chan, Security Minister Chris Tang, Justice Secretary Teresa Cheng, and Constitutional Affairs Chief Eric Zhang.
Overseas, the death toll in the super typhoon that lashed the central Philippines last Thursday has risen to at least 112. Surigao del Norte province bore the brunt of Typhoon Rai. The neighboring island of Bohol was also badly affected. More than 200 towns are still without electricity, and 3 airports were damaged. President Rodrigo Duterte, who toured affected areas, promised financial aid. Rai has been downgraded to a tropical storm and is expected to be closest to Hong Kong on Tuesday. The Omicron crisis in Britain has worsened, with infections rising sharply and 7 deaths attributed to the fast-spreading COVID variant.
We're incredibly concerned by the huge surge in the Omicron variant. Over the last 24 hours, we've had the largest number of new cases since this pandemic began, more than 26,000. Hospital admissions are going up, but also staff absences are going up by massive levels.
Despite Sadiq declaring a major incident, clashes broke out in London between those who opposed vaccinations and police. Some officers were injured when skirmishes continued into the night outside the Prime Minister's residence in Downing Street. In France, protesters in Paris and other cities condemned government plans to issue a vaccine pass. They said moves to limit access to public venues for the unvaccinated is a form of blackmail and dictatorship. In the Netherlands, Prime Minister Mark Rutte announced the start of a tight 4-week lockdown. Santa hats are in big demand as people around the world count the days to Christmas. Members of the Christian minority in the Pakistani city of Karachi held a peace parade. As they made their way across the city, they handed out gifts to people along the route. In Moscow, there was an abundance of Santa Clauses in the suburb of Hinky as Russians prepared for Christmas. The highlight was the arrival of Father Frost on a horse-drawn carriage. Onto the weather now. The pleasant conditions are over for now. It'll rain and be colder tomorrow with the temperature at between 15 and 19 degrees. The mercury will rise as the week progresses. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for Sunday night. Join us for more news at 10. I'm Johanna Chan. Thanks for watching. Good night.